All right, everybody, get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into the future of weather forecasting. And I'm talking way beyond just checking your phone to see if you'll need an umbrella.
Exactly. What if you could know precisely where and how much it'd rain, like hours or even days beforehand? That's the kind of thing we're diving into.
Love that. Okay, so we're kicking things off by looking at those awful floods in Brazil a couple weeks back. Over 500,000 people displaced. I mean, just to put that into perspective, that's nearly the entire population of Wyoming. It's easy to just kind of skim over numbers, but you got to think about the impact on families, homes just wiped out, entire
Yeah.
communities.
It's a really stark reminder of why getting those forecasts right is so incredibly important. And honestly, those traditional methods just completely missed the mark this time. You know, those ground-based radars can have blind spots? Well, those gaps in coverage meant they basically missed how severe the rainfall was going to be, and ultimately that's what caused these floods.
And that is where our focus, tomorrow.io, really comes into play. They're utilizing some pretty mind-blowing tech to make those forecasts way more accurate.
Yeah, they are. So instead of just depending on ground radar, they've got this whole network up in space, a constellation of satellites, and they're all equipped with something called microwave sounders.
Microwave sounders. Okay, gotta admit, that sounds pretty complex.
It's actually cooler than it sounds. Think of them like X-ray vision, but for the atmosphere. They cut through those clouds and measure stuff like temperature and moisture levels, and believe me, that is key for getting those spot-on predictions.
So while those older forecasts were, well, missing the mark, tomorrow.io was basically dead on.
Totally nailed it. Their data for Porto Alegre, that was one of the cities hit hardest, was incredibly accurate. I mean, scarily accurate. It lined up almost perfectly with the actual rainfall they got.
Wow, that's wild. Okay, so they can predict rainfall way more accurately, but what does that actually mean for the average person? That's where their flood index comes in, right? So this flood index, it's more than just like knowing how much rain is on the way. It's about figuring out where the risk of flooding is highest.
Right. Exactly. It's all about prediction. We're talking about knowing days ahead of time which neighborhoods, even which streets, have the highest likelihood of flooding. That's the kind of power this technology has.
Okay, now that is what I call useful information. You could use that to prep your house, maybe warn your neighbors, even figure out escape routes if things get really bad.
Absolutely. And get this, they just revealed this new version, Flood Index 4.0. Even more precise, totally driven by data. We're talking potential game changer when it comes to being ready for floods.
This is all starting to feel very, well, real. But let's talk about how this is actually being used. Who's relying on this tech out there in the real world?
Well, remember those floods we were talking about earlier in Brazil? Yeah, so Azul Airlines, they're a pretty big airline over there, and they're already using tomorrow.io's platform to help them make those critical flight decisions.
No kidding. So they're using these super accurate forecasts to prevent delays, make sure their flights are safe. That's a big deal.
Think about it. For something as intricate as aviation, knowing exactly where and when you're going to run into nasty weather is everything. Routing, scheduling, even knowing when those planes need de-icing. And Azul, they've seen a real difference since they got on board. I mean, they've dodged tons of delays and disruptions, all thanks to these accurate predictions.
Wow. So we've gone from predicting a little rain to basically preventing chaos in the skies, all because of this tech. It reminds me a bit of that earthquake prediction system they're developing in California, using early warnings to give people a heads up. Could this be a similar game changer for like all kinds of weather events?
It's a great comparison. And you're spot on. This is so much bigger than just avoiding a little rain. We're talking about really harnessing this technology, building a future where we're more resilient, especially as we deal with, climate change and everything.
It really feels like we're finally catching up to the realities of this whole climate change thing. Because we know these extreme weather events, they're getting worse, more frequent, way more intense.
Yeah, it's impossible to ignore.
Think about those wildfires they had in California last year, or that crazy heat wave in Europe. It seems like we're constantly getting caught with our pants down.
And that's exactly why what we're talking about today is so important. It's not just about reacting after the fact. It's about anticipating these events, being ready for them, and ultimately creating a future where these things don't hit us quite so hard.
So like shifting from just reacting to actually being proactive.
100%.
Instead of cleaning up the mess after the storm, we're reinforcing the house before it even gets here.
Precisely. And that change, that shift in how we think about this stuff, that's what's going to make all the difference as we deal with climate change.
This has been, honestly, kind of mind-blowing. I mean, we started with your basic rain forecast, And now we're talking about satellites predicting floods and even helping airlines stay safe, which leads to the big question, what's next? If we can do all this today, what's weather forecasting going to look like in like 5, 10, 20 years?
See, that's what gets me so excited. What we're seeing now, it's just the tip of the iceberg. As this technology keeps evolving, just imagine a world where we can predict and maybe even lessen the impact of hurricanes, tornadoes, heck, maybe even volcanic eruptions. The possibilities are pretty much endless.
It really does feel like we're on the verge of a forecasting revolution. And you know what? That's something I think we can all get behind. It's not every day we get to dig into tech that has the potential to really make the world a better place. So, to all of you listening, next time you pull up that weather app on your phone, take a second to think about all the amazing things happening behind the scenes and the potential it has to build a safer, more resilient future for all of us.